Right.
Where's Rob?
Good evening and welcome to the July 31st, 2023 City Council Special Meeting. I am Mayor Ross and tonight's special meeting is brought to you live using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. And the recording will be posted on the city's YouTube channel. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. City Clerk Dean, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Benson,
Here.
Councilmember Watton, Councilmember Holloway,
Here.
Councilmember Mayhew,
Here.
Councilmember Washington,
Here.
Councilmember Christensen, here, Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Mayor Ross.
I am here and Councilor Watton has requested an absence for tonight's meeting. Is there a motion to
So moved.
excuse?
Second.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, second by Councilor Mayhew. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? And it is unanimous and Councilor Watton is excused. Next item is the first item of special business is to approve the agenda. Council may I have a motion to approve the special meeting agenda.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, second by Councilor Washington. Is there any discussion? Mayor Pro Tem Holloway,
I'd like to motion to move item number 2, the executive session, to be top of the agenda so we can get that out of the way. May I have a second?
so it's moved by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway and second by Councilor Christensen to move the executive session to first order of business. Any other changes, suggestions?
Could it be made bigger so I could read it?
Not really.
Maybe we can make your eyes younger.
Please.
Please, yeah, me too. I want it on that.
Plus at the top.
Yeah, I know.
We just got discussion.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, so we're going to vote on the agenda with the motion of moving the executive session first. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? And the motion passes. And we have to vote again for the overall. I think we do, okay. And okay, so now we've approved the motion. So overall agenda, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? All right. So the ayes have it and the special meeting agenda is approved as changed. So tonight we have an executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101A to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency matters relating to agency enforcement actions or to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency litigation or potential litigation to which the agency, the governing body, or a member acting in an official capacity is or likely to become a party when public knowledge regarding the discussion is likely to result in an adverse legal or financial consequence to the agency. And lasting probably approximately 20 minutes. Those attending executive session, we would ask our interim city attorney, David Linehan, interim city administrator, Mike Chambliss, and we'll invite Peter Hamling to also join us. And council, we will go up to the conference room up above.
Point of order?
Yes, Councilor Howard,
Did we,
Mayhew.
did we just invite a member of not city administration and city council to come to our executive session?
Since it is part of it.
Council can invite a necessary party, and if my understanding of the mayor's intentions for the discussion would be appropriate to include this particular individual.
Point of order? Can we be
Take your
told
point.
why that would be appropriate before we approve it?
Well, I guess what we could do is go into executive session with just the council and mayor and the city administrator. And if you feel comfortable, then Mr. Hamblin can join. And if not, then he'll remain here.
Would that be okay, Mayor, or do you need a motion for that, or would that be okay?
No, that is fine.
Thank
Is that how the rest of council wants to?
Yes.
Yes,
I
okay,
think that makes
sounds
sense.
fine. So the city attorney and city administrator and council will go into executive session. And then if we need an added member, we will request Mr. Hamlin to join us. So at this point, we will be upstairs, and so it takes about 5 minutes to get there. So we will state that we will be back in session at 30. So 20 minutes. So I will text you. So if we can pause the recording. Right. So it is, we entered our executive session at 7:45 and we're reconvening at 7:47. And now we move to the next item on the agenda, which is AB 23-097 Pacific West Rail Model Train Museum. So this is an opportunity for council to review and discuss the proposed model train museum. And we'll start with, is there an introduction by administration and then also council discussion?
Good evening, council. As we've discussed on several occasions, there's a desire by Mr. Peter Hambling to build a model train museum on the parcel at the corner of 202 and the Parkway, the vacant parcel that's zoned for open space park recreational use. The project requires no city funds in cash. There are costs, opportunity costs was pointed out to me in the past, and you're 100% correct. Once you decide to go down the road, you're committed, and that's true. Some questions were asked in the past. We have draft responses to those questions that we can discuss tonight. We did some pretty in-depth research to demonstrate why this is the best use for that parcel. And the applicant and his team is here tonight. I spy a model of the proposed museum that looks like it was crafted with care. So I'm not sure where you want to go with this. I know you wanted it more of a roundtable, open discussion type format. So I will yield it back to whoever's going to start.
We will do round robin. So who, Councilor Mayhew?
Yeah, so my hope tonight was that we'd each have a chance to chat with Mr. Hambling and his team. I've got a whole list of questions. Probably have follow-on questions. I'm really curious about their perspective on various things. I think I'd still like to see us just do that. Let's just go have a conversation with him. And so I moved to just suspend the rules and go into just discussion with Mr. Hambling, just free form. Out there.
So there's a motion by Councilor Mayhew to suspend the rules and second by Councilor Johnson and have an open discussion. We will need to know what those rules are because it's very specific in the rules of procedure. And we do have an issue with audio and video by just having a conversation out there. We have to pass around the handheld mics and the video may not be able to capture you or at times hear the conversation. Councilor Mayhew?
Yeah, none of that's true. There's no law that requires us to hand. In fact, we regularly don't do it. We have town hall meetings. We don't do that. We have council member coffees. We don't do that. We don't have rules. We just go chat with our folks. Let's just go chat with the guy.
You want to take-
I think the council can choose what rules to apply to this meeting. Certainly you can suspend the rules, but I guess the question would be which rules are you suspending? Because there's a whole lot of rules and I think it's important for us to know, when if there's a
All
or a
of
point
them.
of order like this, who's going to recognize the point of order and who's going to rule on it. So.
Councilor Benson?
I guess my biggest concern would be that if anybody came to this meeting with the plan of making public comment on this, that they should be allowed to do that before we suspend at least that rule. That would
Actually,
be,
there's no public comment this
Yeah.
evening.
well, then great. We took care of that.
Councilor Christensen?
My concern would be that there's 4 members of the public who appear to be online, and I think it would be quite disappointing if they were not able to hear to the extent that we're having conversations. And and they'd wanted to be able to listen that way.
Counselor Johnson, do you have a comment? Okay. Counselor Mayhew?
Yeah, I appreciate that concern, but look, we don't worry about that when we have town hall meetings. We don't worry about that when we have council meetings with the public. My goal is to have a chat with this guy and his team. And just hear the answers. My goal is not to posture for the public. We got plenty of time for that. Let's just go chat with the guy. I have some concerns. Maybe I shouldn't have them. Maybe when I say them, he and his team will share them and maybe something different will happen. Each of you may have the same. Can we just have a chat with the guy?
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
Yes and no. So I think we can have informal chat, us sitting here and the applicant up here. I'm getting enough concerned, the conversation is heightened right now. So as far as us as a body, I'm not sure I want any conversations outside the limelight. We individually may have conversations or whatnot, but as a body, I don't want give anybody the opportunity that says, you guys had conversations, we weren't privy to it. And this is how these things come about. So at this stage, I do think we can have an informal conversation, but I think we can have it where we are with the applicant up there so that video and audio is captured. And if there's any questions, we can say here.
Can we just have a chat then? Just
Yeah,
suspend the
just
rules
a
and chat with him?
Chat, but from our seats and the podium and their seats, very informal. I don't think we can suspend Robert's Rules of Orders, and I often do. Have a conversation.
You even know them.
I just want to make sure that I get a chance to posture. Because
You did your hair just for the posturing tonight.
I wore a shirt.
On my fist. On my face.
So then so we have several different things. So rule 1.21.1. If you want to suspend with Robert's Rules of Order.
So move.
Seconded.
Point of order, there's a motion on the table.
Oh.
Okay.
Unless this is a sub motion, you can't just make a different motion.
I think it'd be a sub motion.
It didn't sound like it. If that's what you're doing, then
Is
let's
it
do that.
motion?
I move to modify and clear the motion on the table to specifically suspend Robert's Rules of Orders.
Second.
So Mayor Pro Tem Holloway and second by Councilor Johnson. So Councilor Vincent. Second.
It's okay. He can have it. I
Okay,
just wanted
okay.
to posture. So.
Any discussion on that? Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Okay, going back to the original motion, which was basically to have a chat. Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
So I specifically chose the words I did on the last motion. So I need to understand what you mean by have a chat. Do you want to suspend council in current position? Or are we remaining in the seats here so audio gets picked up, video gets picked up? Please define what the chat is and how we orchestrate this.
I just want to go stand out there and sit with him and chat with him and see. I want to ask him some questions. He's a people guy. I think when I bring things up, I think I'm going to walk away understanding all the things I don't understand right now. And I just want to have a free flow chat. And when I say something stupid, I want Ethan Councilmember Benson down there to say, well, that was stupid. Don't do that. That's a dumb question. And, we just chat and we sort of get somewhere good. So that then what comes back when we're actually asking the public, here's a thing we want you to comment on. Here's a thing we're actually thinking about doing, that's sort of had the benefit of some discussions. Otherwise, what am I going to call him on my own? I'm one guy. Where are you to save me, Benson, when I say something stupid?
You'd be lost.
I'd be lost.
Be lost. Can we start with some comments from Mr. Hamling about the
Actually,
cool
we have
stuff
not-
he
We
brought?
need to vote on it. So we need to figure this out. I think it's only fair that the public be able to see us and be able to hear us. So
Microphone's picking up the room, right?
Not well.
up here, or you have to have handheld.
Is our purpose to posture the- or to talk to somebody?
Well, they have a right to
I-
hear us.
yeah,
They
I-
have a right, they have a right to.
Publicly knows they had every right to be here.
Yes, but it was publicly noticed online via Zoom or in person. And so again, for the people who've dialed in, who expect to be able to hear and listen to what we have to say, I think it would not be appropriate to basically cut off that access that way,
That's
because
fair.
they won't be able to get here in time and they won't be able to benefit from what we're talking about. Or at least have additional questions of their own.
Counselor Johnson,
Move to suspend rule 3.6.3.1. It should be the duty of the mayor to give every council member who wishes an opportunity to speak when recognized.
Seconded.
moved by Counselor Johnson, second by Counselor Benson. On 3.6.3.1, it shall be the duty of the mayor to give every council member who wishes an opportunity to speak when recognized. So and you're stating not, so
Yeah, just to clarify, on 3.6.3.3, that it should be the duty of the mayor to require all speakers to speak to the question and to observe the rules of order. Well, I think that the rules of order have kind of just been suspended, but at least that we speak to the question. I think that's important. I mean, if we go astray of what we're supposed to be here talking about, then I think the mayor should interject and tell us, hey, we need to get back on topic. I've got a million questions about all kinds of CIP things I'd love to chat with Mike about, but that's not what we're here to do.
Can you believe you don't come to these all the time?
okay.
Yeah.
So now we spent 15 minutes on this, so there's a motion on the table now to suspend with 3.6.3.1. Any further discussion on that item? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, no? All right. So we suspended with 2 articles of our rules of procedure. Now we need the final motion of having an informal chat. So any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay?
Nay,
Nay.
don't know what an informal chat is.
Okay, so it has, that motion did not pass. Mayor Pro Tem Holloway,
I would still like the motion suspending the Robert Rules of Order and ask that the chair no longer be a chair, but a facilitator for the discussion that come, and that we remain in our seats. Applicant takes up the microphone and we have a informal chat in situ.
I thought you didn't know what that was.
I just defined it.
Seconded.
I made very careful that I defined it.
okay, so we have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, second by Councilor Benson, to still suspend with rule 1.2.1 Robert's Rules of Order, that the chair shall facilitate, but we will sit at the dais and have an informal chat with the project leader. Is that right? Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay?
Nay.
Okay. Approved by, I guess, nay by Councilor Mayhew. All right, so let's go ahead and get started.
Finally, come on up. If you're still awake out there, come on up.
Finally. Okay.
And you can sit too if you want, if there's a mic right there, or you can stand.
Yeah, then formal.
Be comfortable.
Yeah, no, yeah, very much so. We don't have a prepared presentation for you, so yeah, it's gonna be informal. So you guys ask me questions.
What'd you bring?
Oh,
what's this?
sorry, we can start with that. So,
Show us the toys.
yeah, let me make some introductions. So from Olson Kundig, we have Edward Lalonde in the front row here, Michael Parashchek in the back. You've met him before. And we have two of our 3, Rob Nelson, David Hazelton, and that
Oh,
one.
you
miss-
need, you,
Probably need the handheld.
Yep,
right, You can use hand right here on the table.
Oh.
Oh.
Mike.
So informal.
Can we just talk into this? I can do it.
Just need to press that.
I don't think it
Okay.
picks up enough.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. That better?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Let me start over. From Olson Kundig Architects, Edward Lalonde in the front row, Michael Paraschek in the back row. And from our crew, Rob over here, David in the back, and Todd Gamble, who lives in Snoqualmie, is not with us. So Todd is a very good artist, did all the scenery on this model railroad. And so he constructed a building model, which is what Olson Kundig has designed, pretty much the same. These two guys could speak to the differences. In fact, maybe one of them makes it a little bit better than what they designed. But that's just to give you an idea of what the building would look like, the shape, the feel of it, the length and the width and so on. Okay. Other than that, ask questions and I'll do my best to
Anything
answer.
special about the train?
That's from
It's the same size as his.
That's for scale.
same scale.
It's for Mr. Chambliss's.
Ah,
But the train is for scale. Is that what we're saying? Okay.
Oh, I see.
Just to give you an idea.
You see him
Yeah,
for
it's not the
ants.
correct scale.
So what questions do we have?
Can we open it up? Are there teeny tiny trains in there? No.
What's that?
Can we open it up? No, there's nothing inside there. No.
I
no,
don't think
there's
so.
no- Okay.
One of the things I was wondering about with it was, has a structural engineer had the chance to look at it to make sure that that design actually works? Back in my school, we had where I teach, we had this career day and we had a structural engineer come and an architect come. And the structural engineer said, yeah, the architects are important. They make the buildings look pretty, but they also sometimes make floating floors that actually have support. I'm just wondering, at what point is this building as it's looking at along the journey toward being a potential final product?
Let me get Edward to answer that.
We're at a very preliminary stage, what we call concept design, but we have met with a structural engineer, Lund Upsall, and they have given us some guidelines. We've also met with general contractors too. So just to know that there's some rules of thumb with a span and a truss that we've taken into account. So some of the renderings that I think Peter has shared with you in previous meetings show what that structure might look like on the inside. And those are pretty realistic proportions of members, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that's kind of related is I was wondering, because I think it's near a critical area, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's one that's nearby. I was wondering about runoff. Right now, that's a dirt lot, which I would assume would be somewhat permeable for rainwater. If it's not going to be a permeable lot anymore, has anyone looked at kind of the drainage patterns? Does there need to be a storm pond for the runoff? Just those kinds of things that have to do with the environmental concerns around, or is it still way too early for all that?
It's still early, but there is a conceptual site plan that reroutes the swale, the bioswale that's on site, and makes that part of the courtyard experience as you arrive. And then the parking that we have planned, the city requires a certain number of parking. That will all be grass pavers, so that is considered a permeable solution. But that is definitely a later on phase of detail.
Well, and there is, at least on the backside of the proposed lot, a creek. It is sensitive, and at least in the last conceptual drawings I've seen, you have either moved this building to be toward the parkway or toward railroad, away from that sensitive waterway. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
there's a 100-foot setback from Kindle Creek, I believe is what it's called, and we are observing that.
Are you 100 feet or are you more?
We are more than 100 feet. The building is more than 100 feet.
Just sort of follow up on that with Kimball Creek, in some early discussions with the tribe, they expressed a number of concerns, and not claiming that this is the only concern they brought up, but one of the concerns they had was at that time, I think we're showing them a potential location that was much closer to the creek than what you currently, I think, are envisioning. And they expressed the idea that there's many ideas. This is not their only idea. I'm not attempting to speak for them, but that a building farther away from the creek would be better than a building that's closer to the creek. You know, my take on this was that this was at least partly in response to that, which I thought was fantastic, to try and respond to some of the tribe's concerns that way. They were concerned about the tree line, the existing tree line that's there now, and not wanting that to be impacted. In fact, they were in favor of that tree line potentially, not specific, generally, they love the idea that that tree line might move more towards the parkway. Do you have any thoughts at this point as to whether this project would impact the current tree line where it is around Kimball Creek?
And feel free to take the mic from me at
Yeah,
any
go
point.
ahead.
Here.
I had not heard that comment from the tribes, and so in all sincerity, it is not in direct response to that. But architecturally, we thought it was stronger to hold the edge of the site nearest the parkway, because for many reasons. One, we claim that edge of the site, so having the building as a billboard architecturally is a lot more interesting, especially for a museum as a public entity or amenity rather. And it also makes more efficient use of the site by having the parking in the. We also want people that are driving by and visitors to see the building first, not a parking lot. So there are many benefits to that, architecturally, design wise, urbanistically, all those things. And coincidentally, it does not impact the tree line. So it's sort of a win-win-win, maybe.
Yeah. And is that area? Sorry, I just don't know the answer. I'm hoping you might. So we have floodplain areas in Snoqualmie. We have floodway areas. Obviously, this isn't a floodway, but I don't know if it's a floodplain. Are you having to put this on? I'm going to use a lay term, stilts. Are you having to put this on stilts or anything like that, or is this impacted by floodplain?
It is impacted. It is in a FEMA sensitive zone, so we do need to raise the building up a certain level. But what we are doing is creating below grade parking, and so the code requires us to not displace water in a flood event. So the open below grade parking, and by raising the building up, it allows that in a flood event for the water to pass through the site, assuming that the museum is not occupied in a flood event. So, you know, the parking could just become area for discharge.
So the entrance is raised, I believe, if I remember correctly, that you got stairs going up to it. Then
Yes.
is the parking lot, then I think you just literally said it, is it below grade?
Yeah,
To
it's
kind of offset that.
it's actually both. So the FEMA, I think we have to lift about 4 feet. I could be remembering this thing correctly. So what we've done is we have a partially submerged parking, and that raises the building just slightly above. So it's a day lit basement, to use a lay term, where the parking exists.
Go ahead, just jump in.
Can you talk about the inspiration for this particular design of the building? And did you go through several iterations in the process, or are you still very early in the process of design?
Despite what Peter might think, it is still very early. I know that he really loves the design as it is. We did iterate internally, but we wanted just to kind of explain, and I'm sure you've all seen the plans at this point, about this. From this level over is all the layout, so the actual model railroad. And it's a big building, actually. I mean, considering it houses a very small scaled object. And so it was important that that space be open, that it's not filled with columns, to your earlier point about structure. And so that you can kind of experience the space uninterrupted in a way, and let the objects, the actual experience of the railroad itself be what you notice, not the museum, or the architecture per se. And so we wanted to be an open floor plan, but we also wanted to be a really simple building because it is so large that it can be very expensive. So there was cost benefit to kind of a simple, almost barn-like structure. But in terms of inspiration, it draws from some of the model railroad, sort of what we call tectonics, but the way the building goes together. So it is a steel truss system. It's a wood siding building. We think at least that it's a dark wood siding, which kind of relates to some of the railroad pieces and earlier cars and things like that. So really expressed structure, and detailing and things like that. So definitely in the months ahead, if the project does proceed forward, there'll be a lot of those details that will get worked out and presented as is appropriate. But yeah, our goal was to make a simple building.
I'm just curious, are there any energy efficient aspects to the building?
Yes, we imagine that the entire site will manage its own water, and that we can, we have done initial analysis on the PV, photovoltaic solar potential for the roof. It's a huge roof. So although in the Northwest, we don't get as much sun as other areas, but there's a lot of potential to look at that as well. And we are trying to optimize natural ventilation where possible. Obviously in the layout area, the objects are very sensitive to climate control. So that will have to be one zone. But we feel that there's many opportunities to have open air ventilation in our mild climate. I say that in one of the hottest summers we've ever experienced. But yeah, it's our intent that it will be as sustainable as possible.
Just don't put the intake next to the restroom.
Noted.
Seemed to work well.
There's no particular reason we say that.
Another thing about it is, so I'm glad that it's in a somewhat early phase so that I don't have to get married to that exact building as it is. There are things that still need to occur. Having that one wall that is just very solid and dark, obscuring the tree line that I know the tribe may be worried about. I also don't want to speak for them by any means, but that they could be worried about. That is on the north side. And one of the things that I know about museums is I was a docent in one for a while. The thing that kills exhibits faster than people touching them is the sun. So you don't want to have really windows on the south facing side, but the side facing the parkway is north facing. So I'm wondering if there's a way to do windows to kind of break that up a little bit, to just break up the visuals of that one just very solid side of the building as you're going across. There are a number of ways to do that, where you could still have the big label Northwest. I'm sorry, that's the other train museum. What's this?
PWR.
To say that across the side, even if you have the windows there, it doesn't have to mean that you have a smaller space for the name. So it's just something to think about that could make that side just look a little bit less solid.
Yeah, agree. When the model showed up this afternoon, we had similar comments about where maybe to have additional openings, and it's something to
Break
study.
it up a little bit.
Yeah. And the graphic as well is an idea as a way to kind of signal what the building is, to have a super graphic or something, but that's, I don't want to call it a placeholder, but it's the initial idea to be studied further on.
Right.
Can I ask a little bit more on that topic? So, Brian, Councilmember Holloway, you know better than I do. Historically, hasn't the city been very concerned? What?
Is that an old comment?
Yeah. Can you say something about my eyes?
No, I didn't say.
No, but in all seriousness, I think there's always been and maybe I'm wrong, but always a concern about driving up and down the parkway that there be after the sidewalk, I don't know if that's the right thing to call that, I guess the sidewalk, that then there be trees before a building, that this seemed to be a really important thing to the city throughout its development. But am I is that true? And I guess first I want to see if that's true. If it's true, then I got a question obviously to them of, are they planning for that or so on? But I don't even know if that's true.
Well, it might be good for planning director, but at least when I play back to the hotel, there was discussion about at least breaking up the view from the parkway. And
Yeah.
at least having some natural elements there to break that view of I hate to say it, what could be a massive building right there. That the trees, whatever, could break that view up and soften it a little bit in regards to view from Parkway.
So maybe I don't know if you want to comment if you've had any thoughts on trees, but if not, no need to comment. Maybe that's just something you take away from this is, okay, there's some questions about that and maybe just sort of make sure you're thinking about
I
that.
think that's a fair point, and it'd be nice to look at the language and see how we could adhere to that.
Another thing about having windows on that side is they could have some reflectivity to them. And right across the parkway is a whole bunch of trees.
Yeah.
So you just see trees
Mhm.
essentially.
Smart, cheap trees.
It should be an architect.
Couple of, and I do engage with the planning department. I want to make sure we're okay on standoffs from Parkway, from Railroad, from that creek. I think we've addressed that. That we've got that. We're also dealing with height. And I think you've already addressed zero rise, which is the floodplain. I think you're probably good there, but good to double check. Really good at this early stage, really double check and get that going. I do want to talk, I guess two other things. One, can you, and this may be Peter. Can you talk to the potential interactions of this museum with other attractions, other businesses within Snoqualmie? How do we nurture, going in, how do we prepare to nurture that relationship and have them help feed you and you feed them and becomes a win-win for community wise?
Yeah, let me answer that first in relation to North Railway Museum. And I think I mentioned this to you before. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for them. So it's very much in our interest that they are healthy, they are happy with us, and we believe together we can do much better. It's not the sum of the parts, it's a synergy. And I think we can help them because you draw visitors from the falls, coming up from the falls, and then they go on to a little interurban or some pathway, walk a pathway to the real McCoy because they see an engine sitting out front. So it's important for everybody in the community and all of you to understand that's why we're here, is because of them. The other locations we were looking at were all on the BNSF lines, because when I wanted to move this long ago, the vision I had was to put it next to a real railroad. So you go from the full scale to the subscale and you make that connection maybe through a quick change. But if all you have is a model railroad, it misses, I think, with a connection to real life, and the real life is cool. So that's one thing. We would want to explore whether we can get a right turn out of the lot into the town of Snoqualmie, and frankly, that would go by the casino for that matter. So it might make it more attractive to the tribe. But if you can do that, you would basically direct more traffic into the town of Snoqualmie, which for the businesses in the town would help immensely, I think. That would require, I addressed this last week, but that would require a crossing. It's an expensive piece of equipment, $750,000, I think. Obviously, it would require Northwest Railway Museum to be part of that decision.
I think, I don't want to miss one. I think both yourself and the Railroad Museum are charitable organizations, or will be.
Yeah.
I think there's an opportunity for both of you to make a case that, the charitable money that comes your way has somewhat of a multiplication factor, because it's not only you, but you will have a splashover effect on the railroad, as well as the railroad will have a splashover effect on you. So I think it's an opportunity for maybe both the charitable organizations to make a case for a little more money.
Yep.
Out of the pool that's out there.
Yeah, I think it's what I would call synergy. It's not the sum of the parts.
Didn't want to use that word.
Yeah, and I think that there probably is some concern, citizens or the Railway Museum, that we're going to detract from some of their visitors or their fundraising. I don't see that at all. In fact, I think if anything, it'll make it easier because it'll be a combined system.
Yeah, you're gonna attract a whole other demographic that's also going to love the Northwest Train Museum.
Yeah.
It's gonna be
I think it's, and you know, all the kids that come to see Thomas are gonna wanna go see trains they can manipulate themselves, and I think it's
That's what we think.
gonna be amazing.
So just a couple thoughts. Satellite, you might want to check in more about that right turn only, across that exit across the railway there. I did a little more checking. Don't take this as definitive, nothing definitive, but it seems like maybe there's no way that the state would that current guidelines would ever get a crossing approved that close to the Parkway crossing. They look at proximity to other crossings.
Interesting, yep.
So if you dig into that, you may find that that actually is sort of a big hill to climb. Let's just leave it at that. But so you might want to check into that. You're right, there's a cost as well. But after you kind of talked with us on that, my initial reaction was, hey, that's great. That, anything that brings more visitors into downtown Snoqualmie is fantastic for our city. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought that it may not work out that way at all. I did sort of have I just did have the thought of, I pack up my kids, I go to the model train museum, and then I stop in at the casino on the way home. I thought maybe I didn't, maybe, I don't know. So, but anyway, but the more I thought, being serious now, the more I thought about it, the more I thought the key is if I bring my kids there and I get them, I mean, you all know, right? Once you put the kids back in the car, they're hungry. Yep. Driving 1 mile and unpacking them when you don't even know the restaurants, you're not familiar. Like, it seems like maybe that wouldn't happen. So it seemed like a big key to this really producing the economic impact that we're hoping for. And you've talked about this, is the idea that they might ride a railway car or a train into downtown. So I did have a chance to talk with Richard Anderson of the Northwest Railway Museum about where they're at with their interurban. Thank you. I always want to call it the wrong thing. So trolley car, which it's not. Unless my car is the same thing as an 18-wheeler, those are not the same things. But anyway, that project I think is, so I don't want to speak for Richard either, but I get the idea that that's, it's a major renovation they have to do, and they have to figure out how to power it. Although I think they've got some ideas how that would work. Mm-hmm. Their biggest thing, as I understand it, is how to make that operate, which means they have to hire 2 employees, was the information he gave me. Mm-hmm. And he told me what those 2 were, and it sounded really cool. And I don't know what those words mean. So, but they're like people that make trains go.
Engineers.
Yeah, things like that. You might know something about engineers. So, but in any event, and it just seemed interesting to me, if that's a cost, but that's bringing economic benefit to our city, there might be a role, obviously, for his museum putting that thing on rails and running it during the week. That might be advantageous for what you're proposing to do, might be advantageous to the city. There might be a whole bunch of sort of angles on how to make that come to happen. But it did seem like his time frame might match up to when you might be coming online. So it seemed like that's might be something you'd want to talk to them about from sort of a timing perspective, because it did seem to me if the kids have been in, if the family's been in looking at, because when I say kids, that's me too. So the big kids too. But when the kids have been done looking at your museum, jumping on the interurban and going downtown and then maybe kicking around there, maybe have lunch or whatever, just seems like a real way to make that economic benefit happen. Where honestly, my fear with making the cars turn right is we're actually just going to make a traffic nightmare where cars just want to find a way back to the Parkway. So we've got a policing problem with illegal U-turns. Maybe we've got cars diving into neighborhoods and, turning around or going to blocking. Like, it just seemed like that could turn into a traffic negative rather than a positive. And I sort of wasn't convinced that would sort of happen that way. So maybe a little more thought as to that's, I didn't mean a little more thought, but maybe consideration of how to sort of make those people really get downtown might be something you'd think about. And
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know the answer, but maybe more thought on that one.
I think the right turn out of the property was simply an idea we had with it, which we thought was an interesting solution to push or funnel traffic into downtown. But the design that Olson Kundig has been working on doesn't assume that. If it turned out, that's fine. But if it doesn't assume it, then the traffic flow would come in off the Parkway, circle around and go back out the Parkway. And so at that exit, you could have a right turn only onto the Parkway, which probably
The way it is right now, yeah.
So, yeah, so my thought there is for this to really produce, when we kind of look at, hey, why is the city doing this? So even in some of the early draft agreements say, well, the reason we do this is because we think it's going to bring an economic benefit to the city. So the key to that, I think, is getting those folks downtown.
Yep.
You probably are familiar with the numbers. So someone in your town 2 hours, someone in your town 4 hours spends twice as much in the extra 2 hours. So it just makes a big difference. So if we can attract those, if we can sort of funnel a lot of those people, my big sadness is how few people from the falls ever get to our downtown. It's a very small number. Our big economic draw is the Railway Museum. You could be another big economic draw, and I'd love to see how we make that happen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it kind
think,
of makes them a captive audience once they're on the train, right?
Right.
Once they're on the interurban and they're downtown, they're stuck until the interurban goes back. So
Yeah.
spend money.
But for what it's worth, they currently have no plans to have a stop in that location. In fact, they have some other plans. So it just seems like a perfect place for you guys to talk. It seems like that would make a lot of sense. That their goal is to have more people riding the interurban, right? So
Yeah.
you've got a ready-made population. So it just seems like there's some great opportunities for coordination there.
yeah, we've talked to Richard Anderson in the past. In fact, I think the first time was quite a while back, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And I need to reach out to him and sort of get him up to speed on what we're thinking and doing. One of the questions that's come up in my mind for all of you is parking.
Mhm.
That's a challenge. So for example, if somebody comes to the museum and parks there and they take the interurban, then they got to come back to get the car, vice versa. And that's a challenge I don't have any experience addressing, but I'm sure you do, thinking about it and where to put cars.
There's actually a large city lot that would be midway between your museum and the Northwest Train Museum that's owned by the city. There's a big city lot with lots of parking right in there.
Free
That's
park is
underutilized
On
right
Railroad
now.
Avenue.
Yeah, it's right on Railroad Avenue or 202.
Yeah.
And about midway between the Northwest Railway Museum and your proposed museum.
You mean the depot, yeah?
Totally
Yeah,
not
the
speaking
depot,
from
yeah.
experience here, but yeah, so you park downtown somewhere nearby. You take the interurban to the Pacific West Rail.
Good.
And spend your time there. By the time you've gone back on the interurban, now the kids are screaming for food. You look across the street from where you parked and there's a bunch of places to get food. So that works as well. even
And
though
a
it's less
haircut.
captive audience. What?
You can get a haircut too.
Yes, that's right.
Shade.
I'm always looking for that.
And in terms of access that is not via car, I know we're out in the middle of nowhere here. People are driving their cars. I get it. But we do have a somewhat substantial housing development nearby with some young families that might be interested in going as well, who might not want to get in their car. There is a walkway that goes to the lot. I would assume that there would be pathing from where the sidewalk currently ends, to the building, right? But I'm wondering also about perhaps some sort of biking infrastructure. Now, that's bicycles, not motorcycles. Now, where it ends right now, that path does allow for bicycles. But I don't necessarily want to get off my bicycle and then walk another couple hundred feet with it. So I was wondering if there's a way to fit in a bike path, just that extra few hundred feet.
You mean on the gateway lot?
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. Then you have to figure out what do you do with the bikes when you get them there? In a bike rack or
Yeah, you have to
a
have
box
bike
or
racks.
whatever. Look like downtown Amsterdam.
That would be sweet.
one of the, so there has been some concern about name confusion between yourself and the Railroad Museum.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
How wedded are you to the current name that you have on these? Is there some room for discussion of how to do some differentiation?
Yeah, I mean, tell us what you have in mind. We've created the nonprofit LLC as Pacific West Rail Foundation. And we picked those names. There was kind of a logic that went into that. One of the early parts of that was we wanted to make a distinction between Northwest Railway Museum and what we used to be called, which was Northwest Trunk Lines. That's why you went back to that. So most of the early railroads had Pacific in them: Union Pacific, Northern Pacific, Southern Pacific, Canadian Pacific, on and on, Missouri Pacific. And that was, I think, because at the time, the movement was westward in the country, and the railroads are what enabled that. So that was the first word we came up with. And there were a lot of candidates we went through. So it had to have the word Pacific in it. We thought that was pretty appropriate. And then West, meaning it's the Western US. So all of the locations we modeled in the current layout are the Western US. There's nothing east of the Rockies, really. So that's why we chose the word West. And then rail, not railroad. It's not a railroad. It's not a railway. Again, to distinguish a little bit between the Railway Museum here and this. And it was also, in my mind, an attempt to create a name that people couldn't quite figure out. And that may be where you're struggling. Meaning, what does Pacific West Rail mean? And it makes you think a little bit. It's not obvious. A railway? No, it's not a railway necessarily. It's a railroad? No. And we didn't want the word model in there because that implies the main feature is the model. And in my mind, it isn't. And I've mentioned this before, that to me, it's an immersive, imaginary experience. And the trains are simply there to distract you. They move. And yes, you can be into railroads and trains, and that makes obviously a lot of sense, but it's really about getting lost in it momentarily, and getting lost in the imagination, getting lost in the illusion of being in a subscale, and a train goes by. If nothing moved, then the museum becomes static, and it becomes, I would say, dead, but nothing changes. It just sits there. But when something moves, it makes you think about, so why is that moving, and where is it going? Where did it come from? And it makes you move on and look again. So yes, if you have ideas, by all means, let us know.
Another word that came to mind for me is the word miniature, because there is the Victoria, BC miniature world.
Yeah.
And that is a world famous place. I remember it well, having only been there once as a little kid. So instead of being model, it's just another alternative that has been successful elsewhere.
Well, the most successful one by far is Miniature Wonderland in Hamburg, which is enormous and a roaring success in every way.
Yeah, I'm just worried that people look at this and they go, is that the big trains or the small trains?
Yeah.
And I really want people to know which one they're looking at. If I want to go see big trains, I want to go see big trains. If I want to go see little trains, I want to go see little trains.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be confused as a consumer.
I guess what I'd say is we'd like not to change it, but if there's ideas you have, we'll consider them.
So some interesting points. Agree with everything you guys are saying. I had a different thought. My fear is that the names are so close that people will just simply think it's one thing. They just won't take aboard that there's two things. And if I'm planning a day out, knowing that there's two different things makes me plan my day much differently than if I think there's one thing. And so honestly, I think you're, and then the sort of corollary, if I'm right, is people are going to show up at your museum with their tickets from the other museum saying, why can't I get in?
Yeah.
So I just, and maybe as you talk with the Railway Museum, maybe you even sell each other's tickets, hey, you can buy just us, or you can buy a package, or, it's not for us to work the details. We're just goofy council members, but it's something to think about.
We thought about that. It'd be to me, it'd be very effective to sell a ticket that allows you to look at both museums, and it's a discount for each one. Um, you
Maybe
know,
keep the name Pacific West Rail, but then follow it with the little train. Please do not ride, you know,
Well,
Well, parenthetical, the little trains, parenthetical, not the big train.
please don't. No, I think if you just put, please don't ride, then that.
well, one of the conceptual challenges or maybe ideas we had, and I talked to Edward about this early on, is you want to be able to stand across that intersection and look at this building and wonder what's inside. And by wonder, I mean, it's a little bit intriguing. It's a little bit hard to gauge. And so that comes from a bunch of things. One is the structure and the design of the building, and one is the name. So I've said in the past, I really like the name Gateway, and that's the name of this property. So we looked very long and hard at, could we use Gateway in the name? And I'm very open to that. I think it's a very cool name. And it implies, as railroads came across the country, it was the gateway to the Pacific. That was one of their taglines. And so to me, a combination of the name and maybe something else that suggests what's inside. So one of the ideas we had was a subscale, but still pretty big scale locomotive that's above the entrance. So people look at that and they go, well, that's not a real train. So maybe that's what's inside, but then you get in, it's obviously smaller. But it's a challenge to do that. I mean, to get the right balance of suggestion, intrigue, curiosity. Let's go take a look. What is in that?
Yeah, I do worry that if you don't have something breaking up that siding, then I'm not going to wander inside. I'm going to think that it's a warehouse.
Yeah.
And it's, I realize that it can be done in various different ways to help alleviate that problem. But having it broken up with windows gives you that feeling like you could peek inside. Not that
Yeah.
people would come up and peek inside.
Yeah.
They'd be elevated, but it kind of gives you that feeling of that there's a window into another world.
Yeah.
And that there aren't just a bunch of packing crates in there.
And it's a long side too. It's a very long side.
Yeah, and be aware, just maybe with this conversation in mind, if you drive down the parkway, so towards where we are now, if you start, the other end of town, so over by the freeway, and just see how many buildings, just big, because there are warehouse buildings and they're just big walls like that.
Mhm.
And yes, yours would be a different color. So that's one thing I took note of, but people may already be used to, it's just a warehouse. And so that may, maybe factor that into your thinking is what the rest of the parkway looks like as you drive down it. Because that might sort of work against what you're trying to get them to think.
Yeah. One of the early design and conceptual design images that Olson Kundig did had a interesting graphic of a real train on the side.
Huh?
Edward, can you speak to that? Do you remember that early on? No, anyway. See, that's okay. But that would break up the long side, and it would also suggest what's inside, and it's not just a warehouse. Maybe it's just another idea.
I would just say that I agree that I think that it would be helpful to have something, or at least to consider the options to avoid that kind of massing as you're driving down.
And speaking of mass, there is the height that I've brought up before. You said 45 feet, I believe, or somebody said 45. Now, is that from grade or is that from the top of the steps?
That's great, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it's, the building height is measured from the base flood elevation, actually.
No.
In the code, we do have a bit of a height challenge we need to work out a little bit, so it is a little bit taller than it is allowed to be, but.
Had a height challenge on them.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
If I go back for a second to why we cited the building where we did, when we first came out to look at the lot with Tom Kundig and Edward and Michael, we said, I said to them, I think it needs to be up against the trees. And Tom said, I agree with that. And then we looked conceptually in different drawings that they did of putting it up against the trees, putting it right on the parkway, putting it in the middle. And Jack Anderson, one of our board members, with Tom at this meeting, his comment was, if it's in the middle, it's on the nose, what he calls on the nose, meaning it's too obvious. That's where it should be. You put it in the middle of the lot. If you put it back against the trees, first of all, you're up against the Kimball Creek buffer. Secondly, if you want any view of the mountains from that outdoor deck, it's harder to get it up against the trees. But beyond that, we thought it's just nicer on the parkway. My original thought was it's too close to the parkway. Edward, to his credit, that's where he started, and that's where we ended up coming back to. If it's too close, obviously it's just a wall. You pull it back a little bit, which they did. It's what, 25 feet, something like that.
Or the property line itself is about 35, 40 feet off of the parkway.
Yeah.
There's already quite a good buffer and.
Yeah.
And plus, as Edward said, then the parking is all the cars or most of the cars are behind it, not in front, which is they're not unsightly, but it looks, I mean, you want some cars there because you want people to see, hey, there's people doing something there, but not too many.
So I just want, sorry, I'm gonna ask you to basically say the same thing again, but just so I'm clear, so that earlier. And just, I love it being where it is, not those other locations on the lot, but so there's plenty of room then for trees to go up if that's where we went between.
Yep.
The parkway or even the walkway and this building. So there's plenty of opportunity for that,
Yeah.
it seems.
I should also add, some of the ideas we've had for doing this on that lot were, for example, a water tower. Because all the steam engines, that was their fuel. They had to stop and get water and then obviously keep going. Putting a water tower, if only a fake one, but it looks like a real one. You do something inside it that's kind of fun for kids. I don't know. You could get creative with that. And other things on the property that would suggest railroad, but not necessarily obviously. Just structures, shapes. As Edward said, the construction of the building would be heavy steel I-beams that are dark, if not black, and wood, which is probably heavy looking, and dark brown, not or dark green or something that would suggest when you look at it, kind of reminds you of a railroad.
So if you, as you're kind of going along here, but maybe sooner than later is, maybe be able to answer the question of would a building as you're describing, so if I were standing at the Salish Lodge and I looked that direction, would I be able to see it? If I were standing maybe on the, say it at the PSC Museum, would I be able to see it? Probably, I don't know. But what I'm getting at is directions towards the falls.
Yeah.
Looking back, where would I likely be able to see it or not see?
I'm gonna
the
let
building?
Rob answer that because I think you did it, didn't you? Yeah, there we go.
Aha, wise.
Yeah, I was actually very curious about that because growing up here, that's always been something you don't want to be looking at a building or a structure from the falls. Important for everybody that grew up here, important for the tribe, everyone. So I went out there last week and I actually filmed from the upper parking lot, walking across a pedestrian bridge, first possible site. Little tricky this time of year because deciduous trees that have their leaves on it. But it looks like you cannot see any of the building, the corner lot from that location, especially if it's set back, I believe. They're looking at 50 to 100 feet off of that railroad line. You can go down to the Salish Lodge blocks that view easily. And then as you get down to the falls and walk around, there is no view at all of that corner lot, which was something that was very important to us because that's a very sensitive area and we do not want to be seen from that location. So we're really happy about that. But lots of videos and lots of photos to just show that if you guys are interested, happy to share that with you.
Thank you for doing that.
And if I can share one more thing about business, the local businesses, is that we've talked about we don't want a cafe in there. We don't want something that takes business away from downtown business, but something like an espresso stand where we can talk to Black Dog Cafe, maybe the brewery, and serve sandwiches, maybe the local root beer. And then docents, people that are trained to say, if you like that, half a mile down the road, because a lot of people, I have a 14-month-old, once you get in the car, a lot of times you're ready to go. It's hard to get them back out, but people will want to come back here and people will want to, experience the area. So as long as we show that there's some restaurants and things and sample a little bit of their food, it's not ours, we work with them, think it's a great opportunity to give that advertising to them and to work with them. And then even on top of that, Olson Kundig has looked at event spaces where tents and certain things could be put out on the front lot of the corner there. That could be a great opportunity to have local businesses potentially come down there, get known, and, you know, drive people into downtown. But just another thought of how do we get people to go to downtown? And if they don't, maybe you can at least share some of that information with them. So next time they come out, they can visit those places.
I think I mentioned before that in Leavenworth, they have some deal where a bunch of the shops have stuff from other shops in them, like the restaurants. When the clock store exists, if you've never seen it, the clock store was really cool. Too bad it's not there anymore, but they had the clocks up on the walls from the clock shop. And that basically, I remember was enough advertising for me to go, maybe I will go back to the clock shop and maybe I will get one of those things. And I did. So I think that strategy that they have there has at least some potential to work. So I'd like to see how that program could be viewed by the local businesses.
Well, I know you have a young one, and you know, little goldfish. I think we talked about the goldfish, those little things, they can get a little more time out of them. It's amazing when you get a little something in their mouth and now they're back. So, you know, those opportunities to keep the family there, to spend more time in the area, I think, you know, we'd want to look into all of those options.
Yeah, there's, 20 minutes in and they start to crash. And you think, oh no, do we have to throw them in the car so they can take a nap? Give them some goldfish and they're good. I do want to address something I said in the prior meeting, which was peanuts. I'm aware of peanut allergies, so I'm going to say maybe not peanuts.
Yep.
But want to get that out there.
So council, we have about 10 minutes. If everyone wants to get a question in, something burning.
So I guess just once it's operational, I know that you've made some comments in the past about how the museum will continue to grow, at least in terms of what's on display. Will there be changes that happen throughout the year so that there are ongoing opportunities to see new things? Or are you anticipating that it will be relatively static once the additional pieces have been added?
So just to remind you how we would do this, the layout in our basement now is 3,700 square feet, but it's not ADA compatible at all. The aisles are sometimes 2 feet. Walking into it, you go under a 77-inch underpath or entrance. It needs to be 80, things like that.
Mhm.
So we would take it apart, move it, put it back together. In the process, we'd expand it to 8,000 square feet, which would make it ADA friendly. But as I mentioned, that building, the gallery is 15,000 square feet, and that is to allow the 8,000-foot railroad as it begins to grow over 10, 15, 20 years into a 15,000-foot layout. So you do a little bit each year or each 6 months, and you kind of choreograph that with marketing that says we got a new line opening in 4 months, come and see it. Curtains behind or shield it from what's going on behind, so people can't really see it. And then you do an unveiling, big fanfare, and there's a new line that opens up, and you keep doing that. So the layout and the exhibit itself becomes more living and changing. So if you see it now and you come back in 6 months, something is different.
Mhm.
That answer your question a little bit?
It does. I was trying to get at whether it would be basically big chunks over an extended period of time, or whether there would be like more minor things that were changing as an ongoing basis. if
Yeah,
that
could
makes
there be
sense.
like a modular set of things where you could, remove a section and replace it with like a winter scene?
Yeah. Rob can also speak to this better than I can, but we also thought throughout the year, you do special events during Christmas and during Halloween, for example. Yeah, you can speak to that better than me.
I get really excited about this stuff. We nerd out a lot about it. So we have lists of just all these different events that you can do. But different parts of the country, they have these model railroads, and they really make most of their money during the winter time when, it's a Christmas holiday and that. So we have ideas of, even Halloween, you could do a haunted, kind of a ghost themed thing where people can snake through. You could have photos, you could have kids and everyone dress up in outfits and that. So it becomes a family event. But something that we could do is Christmas time, you can dim the lights down and you just change some of the lighting in there because we have time of day lighting. We can go to red and greens. We can do all kinds of different things. So even though you've seen the train layout, you've seen it maybe with the lights up, but you've never seen night trains where you have all these different things that kind of come to life. I mean, it could be photos with Santa, it could be all kinds of photo shoots for family photos, backdrops for every year. There's a different mural of a train and a winter scene that it becomes a family tradition. You come and take your photo in front of it. You know, all these, there's so many different ideas that we've had with this, that our brain just starts kind of exploding because there's a lot of opportunity there.
Wonderful, thank you. One of the things that we always look forward to, for example, when we go to Disneyland, is seeing what's different and new and things like that. And it can get really help people continue to be excited about it
Yeah.
and want to come back year after year. And
As Rob said, we've got more ideas than you've got time to listen to. We've thought, I mean, to be quite straight, we've thought about this whole process and what this museum should be for almost 3 years. Not full-time, but close to it. So things like you offer the ability for parents to buy their kids a boxcar and it has their name on it. You put that in the sequence of 10, 15, 20 boxcars that are being pulled along, and that you bring your son in there and there goes his boxcar. You know, it's kind of, it makes it more connected and more personal. There's also you may or may not know, this is a very interesting subculture in railroad graffiti. And there's an operation in LA, I think it is, called Con Operative. You can follow them on Instagram, and all they do is railroad graffiti on walls that look like the side of a boxcar, but they're not. I mean, it's very real. Or they do subscale, O-scale boxcars, and they do with graffiti on them. It's really cool.
When we went to Naples, we took a bunch of pictures of all the trains with all the graffiti.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. I don't know to what degree that was a structured project.
Well, it's an interesting debate. Is it
It was
vandalism
beautiful though.
or is it art?
Yeah.
And a lot of it is incredible art. And for example, at our company, we hired a guy to come in and paint an 85-foot graffiti art. And he brought in 200 cans of spray paint, 200 different colors. And he was there for 3 days,
Hopefully wore a mask.
probably.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
You may not know the answer yet, and that's fine, but I'm just curious, do you know how many parking spots? And there's sort of a related question, so I don't pepper you. Do you know how many parking spots? And then I'm just been thinking, you spoke to this previously, I think, but this notion of, I think it was you, but what if a bunch of people come at once?
Yeah.
So to speak, and it basically, at least what I took aboard is, well, overloads the parking. It may actually overload your museum. So I suppose you'll have ways of sort of limiting how many people go in so you don't have too many in there and just sort of turns into a zoo. But in terms of parking was more where my thought has been is what happens when you're, how many parking spots, and then what would happen if that parking gets overloaded, especially if we've sucked all the people downtown and left their cars with you. Like how, so I think some of these other ideas that were brought up about other parking that's in the city and then getting them to come to you, but how many parking spots do you have? And do you have any further thoughts on the parking question?
Edward can answer that, but to remind you where that probably came from, we flew Tom Kundig and Jack Anderson down to see the Tillamook Museum, Tillamook Dairy Museum, I think it's called. And during that visit, and Tom and I were walking, he said, you might not think about this, but you're likely to create a bit of a sensation, and it can be extremely stressful when you get too many people. So you plan it for, let's say, 10,000 visitors a week, or something, I don't know, not a week, but a month. And then one day you get all 10,000. And he said it's really quite difficult because you have to have traffic control, you have to have police, you have to have shuttle from an outlandish parking lot that's a half mile away or something. He said it's much more of a problem than you recognize until you start thinking that. I don't know, I can't speak to Edward, you can speak to the parking requirements. One of the things that occurred to us, though, is it may be dictated by the size of the gallery, 15,000 square feet, or the size of the building. But if you think about it, the railroad in the gallery takes up probably half that space. So do you really need a parking space geared to that walkable people area? Don't know. That's maybe more one for you guys to think about.
It did just make me think about, if and hopefully when this really takes off, if it gets really popular, then you could get tour buses that are driving out here and they're gonna need a spot to park.
Yeah, we've accommodated that. Edward, you want to speak to that? Or can you?
Is there a spot?
Yep.
On the topic of parking count, the building code actually dictates that, and it's based on the size of the building and the use, and it's 150 parking spaces. About 50 of them are below the building, and then the others are outside in the outdoor area. And it is designed to be flexible so that when it's empty, because that's the other side of it, when it's empty, you don't want it to look empty. And so the outdoor parking is designed to be kind of a parking greenway. So it will be grass pavers, as I explained before, but also landscape. So that when it's not filled with cars, it looks like a park or landscape. The other point in that is that we have accommodated for school buses, because that's another thing. If school groups come out to visit, that the school that you can drop kids close to the entry, and then the school buses can go off to the side and queue up or wait for the kids to come back. And the other thing I think Peter mentioned, and it's sort of a building department issue more than anything, is that the 15,000 square foot space of the layout assumes that there's nothing in it. I think you were talking about this a minute ago, or implying it. So that's something I think we will work with the building department to look at, but there is sort of an occupancy limit to how many people the building can actually come in, so that, or can accommodate. So the parking is scaled to that, and that's how the code's written.
Yeah, you actually need to have a fire exit somewhere on the far side. I just thought about that.
Yeah, we have several
Yeah.
egress points.
So I was gonna ask for that probably.
So we have about one more minute.
Great.
We need,
One last comment I just want to make was that I'm also really excited to see how this works with as you're moving forward with all the details and stuff. What comes out of it with talking to the tribe and seeing what kind of input they have to improve the space and kind of honor their legacy as well. And I don't really know what all that's going to be because I'm not a member of the tribe. So I look forward to seeing what those negotiations and those discussions end up.
Yeah, that's a personal interest of mine, actually. And I would really like to work with the tribe to do something in the museum or outside it that they find is pleasing and representative of their interests. So one little side note I'll tell you is, for those of you who've seen this railroad in our basement, the scenery backdrop was painted by a guy named Andy Eccleshaw. He's a very gifted mural artist out of Edmonds. And we had Andy come in about a week and a half ago. And when he was there, I said that one day last summer, Lori and I were in Edmonds, and we walked down the street and came across an alley where there were two brick buildings and these really interesting, huge murals, one of which was what Edmonds looked like from the water looking at the land when there was no civilization there. And then you look at the other mural, and that's what the water view looked like from the land when there's no civilization there. And it turns out Andy Eccleshaw did those. And he did it with guidance from one of the Tulalip tribe members. And he's very sensitive to their interests and their needs and their sensitivities. And so I asked him at the time, would you do that on the inside of this museum, like an 80, 100-foot mural of some sort that maybe shows what this whole area looked like before any of us and the buildings and everything else would appear? And he would. So that's of great interest to me.
Thank you for coming.
yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much. We're very excited about the project and we appreciate your sharing more information with us. So thank you. Thank you. So the next, at the next council meeting, we actually will be having further discussion about the model train or PWR on August 14th. And so there being no further business to come before council, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the special meeting.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Johnson, second by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? We are adjourned.